Good afternoon. It's Monday, July 20th, and I've been trying to post this podcast, editing it, and trying to keep my guest confidential, but I am going to attempt to publish it as well as put it on my blog. So I'm hoping that all this will work out fine. If I cannot do it, who knows? Let's try it anyway. I'm just, like I said, I'm just trying to make sure that person I am interviewing or having conversation with has kept private.
A storyline. Crane. Guessed, but anyway, what I was going to say is that Chief Sunshine is about the coolest cucumber in the parking lot. That guy is so calm. And you know what he is? He's a carpenter by profession. He's just a family guy, nothing fancy, handsome as hell. But he's a dad, he's a mushel, and drives his pickup truck, and he's a carpenter. He ain't no fancy bellwig, you know, business commerce degree. Nothing none of that, yeah. I think he just fucked with the wrong guy. You know, he's just a real down-home solid years. And there's a few of them like that, chiefs. You just don't hear about because they just work hard. They author crane, don't you know? You don't see them mouthing off or whatever. They don't take that oil money thrown at them. They're hard-working salt of the earth, you know. There you shake their hands and you know that's a working man's hand. And yet I sit and have breakfast or lunch with them. And they're down to earth. That Coal Lake chief's a young guy. Relatively young compared to the rest. I don't think he's more than 45, maybe 50. I don't think so though. Anyway, he's the representative for the National Child Care Committee. And he's a chief from Cold Lake. And he himself was in foster care. The most dirty, rotten story you could ever imagine that a child in the system happened to him, and now he's a chief. Kelsey, that's his name. Kelsey, what's his last name? Jacko. 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 Told me a story. I got a phone call from a lady I haven't even talked to since I came back from Las Vegas. Again too, when I came back I should have bought tickets to go to Sioux Valley Powell. That was 80th anniversary because 3 months ago it would have been like $160. But nope, I had to spend it on casino. But anyway, I was talking to the lady and she knew about the Globe and Mail's article about the lawsuit with lawyer Terry Bruin, and 'cause she was at the Our Band meeting when they had their first the new chief in council. And they're, like my Aunt Regina and her daughter Jeannie, like they were attacking Lance. And you know, Lance had to defend himself and the chief like Ellery got up and the question was like, why did you let go of our the lawyer? He's been there I think 27 years, 25 years. Get this. He's now working with the Nakota, the Stonies. Okay, but I said, well, now that shit has hit the fan, they probably let him go. I said, she says, no, I didn't hear about this story. I said, but we were talking and she says, but I do remember at the band meeting, she said how they were justifying the release of this lawyer. And she said, I know that the chief and council had their lawyer there and they did consult him while we were talking to like my aunt and her daughter, right? And of course there were like my cousin too worked with this lawyer too. But again too, like you don't know people like personally, but it's just the timeline of it. And and even the emails that he sent to that Sam Murmureshi. Yeah. And even for months there was a period of 4 months that they hadn't even opened the contract, like the procurement process policies. They didn't follow them. And so here's the lawyer, sending this letter off, lets them know. Like this is open and then at the same time they signed it. Before it wasn't like it's just all like they've got all the paperwork. And I'm pretty sure that controller who had the 27-page document of all the monies, I'm pretty sure that leads into that too because I think there was 31,000 or 41,000. There was so much like it wasn't like 100,000. But money was given sort of as an initiative to I don't know how it was supposed to come into Tsutina. But there's Enoch and Métis Nation, 3 of the recovery centers that are being built on top of the 11 in Alberta. And I said to my friend, I said, this Daniel Smith, and this Sem Marisher, I said, and all these separatists, I said, they've been in cahoots with everything to dismantle all the hard work, like decades and decades of Indigenous built-up. I said, like closing Nechi Institute. And even having their hands in the Native Women's Shelter in Calgary, like staffing it with separatist female, board members. And again it's because the Alberta government is playing politics with non-profit minorities against each other. So you have Africans coming into Calgary buying for the same money as the Native Women's Shelter, and the Native Women's Shelter is getting the money because they have separate. They have supporters of Danielle Smith on the board. And that's like I was on the board for like decades ago. I think over 30 years ago, when it first started, before they even built it on McLeod Trail. And all the policies and things like that, like for me I was assigning authority, and I just didn't want to sign things that I didn't know where the money was coming from, and plus that too, there was some mental health issues that I had with some of the board members. Like lateral violence. Misogyny towards me. Exactly. Now she's a basket case. So the reality is whatever policies were in place to firmly establish Indigenous women, like again, that's the plus in terms of the foundation of it. They changed it. They changed it, and they even changed the name of the Native Women's Shelter. So there's this huge protest, and that's when that lady, what's Nipanak? Josie Nipanak. Yeah, Josiah. Yeah, so all that had to do with this than the Separatists, or the Danielle Smith dismantling Indigenous foundations that were built up by grassroots people. It's just to know that is repulsive. And again it's all with the consent of some Indigenous people who, they brown nose and throw little money towards them, and then they bow and say, okay, yes, master. You're white, so you know everything. Like it's just You know, incredible, and I'm glad that Surgeon Lake and Tal Cree this Rath fellow is because his money is being withheld. And one of the lawyers, I don't know, in the article, this lady I was talking to, she says, author, he lives up in Pretas or Bride Creek. And as the fry bread burns, I'm going, damn cause like. I shouldn't laugh because I know all this money has been siphoned like tea, like the news article is saying that Roy Whitney and his family would benefit. And of course, one of the band counselors had to deliver the letter to Roy, and his house has security. Okay, 24/7 security. He's the daughter who passed away last month. She has a house built right on his compound. They have a compound. Like talk about rich that they have to have security. So somebody must have informed him that one of the band counselors was gonna deliver this letter. And when Roy got it, this is just like from one mouth to the next. He said, is this all that they got? Is this all that they're gonna do, like just like it was no biggie? The guy is so used he's just like Trump. He's a sad sack because he's so used to lying. He's even believing his own lies. There's nothing anybody can do, even if he's prosecuted, he'll still say he's innocent. Paper trail doesn't lie though. Conflict of interest law, fraud, forgery, kickbacks, that doesn't lie. The paper trail will trail back to him, and that's where Carrie Tate and these journalists, they've got some really good lawyers in Global Mail. Globe Mail, and they got CBC's got some of the best lawyers. They wouldn't print that shit if they didn't have evidence. Yes. Yes. So the point, the gun is already pointing to him. He can be as cocky, as disrespectful as he wants, but at the end of the day that's all gonna come out in a wash. Well, I was listening to YouTube on the investigative reporters reporting the trial of Nathan Chasing Horse in Las Vegas. And the 2D were discussing the lawyers, and just like how the first case, and how they really were nitpicking everything. So yes, it's like, but the whole drama of it is like you said, the paper trail, and these were like videos that got him, and like the proof is in the pudding. And even then when the judge is sentencing, and he's saying he's not guilty, and she says, but there's evidence, there's the video, and still he's in denial. Like he's still there going no to BR, that's what I mean. The proof is in the pudding. Like Roy Whitney will be on trial. The paperwork will be all there and hit, and he'll still deny it. Like that's what I'm saying. That's okay, that's a form of psychosis. Like it said, remember we talked about before about Donald. Trump and Daniel Smith, and they think they're invincible. And I said, well, it's beyond narcissism. There's a new form of psychosis that and the medical research has to be done. The separatist movement is behind all this crap. where they talk about they blanketly, Indian women are this. Indian chiefs are corrupt. Billions of dollars is going to. First Nations. Meanwhile, they're the fucking freeloaders. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, well, is that we're not even shooting back. We're not even lighting like the dynamite and throwing it back because it's so ridiculous. Well, that's why when immigrants don't know all this and I'm saying no, people like Danielle Smith, I've grown up my whole life around pretending white people who stab me in the back. It's no biggie. But if you're an immigrant and you don't see it, and you're looking at the Native women's shelter, looking at when Indigenous women, when the majority of the board for the women's shelter, is white who or who are separatists. That's just my opinion. That's not only are they separatists, listen to this, they're all Americanized right-wing fascist Pentecostal bastards. I could go on with the list. They're They're not even Canadians and they're in their psychosis they're more apt to shoot and ask questions later. Well, that's why I use the analogy. I said, even though you grow up in a community with a neighbor your whole life, I said it's like anything in war and civil wars and places where the state police knock on the door and say, is so and so your neighbor home? Or is your neighbor so, and they say yes. They said, well, we're gonna shoot in a firing squad and they'll go. Go ahead. Like there's no love lost when it like again this psychosis that's happening, because it's like every man for themselves. And for me, like I said, this whole issue of Nathan chasing horse being sponsored by the chief and council for 20 years has been percolating. And then everybody's going, well, we need a recovery center. I said, what the hell? You're painting. Girls is being so fucking suicidal that we need a recovery center for 24/7. And I'm going, what the hell? We already have Nechi Institute programs, healthy living programs run within our community, and you took it away. Damn but they're being funded. They're being their glad handlers. They're not even. Yeah, they might have stopped drinking. But they're still fucking drunks. They behave like dry drunks. You know, that's why I asked you. It's Jeannie a drinker? 'Cause to me she behaves like she's drunk. Well, that's why when I talk about my own family I said, you know, there's no like nobody drinks. There's no drug abuse. But yet look at what happened in terms of sexual crime. I said, even though that's not there in the equation, we're still suffering from this intergenerational trauma. And the how we think. This dry drunk kind of mentality, because it suppress it like it just like, well, do we give a damn like we suppress things so because we go, I'm too much pain to be triggered by this. I don't want to talk about it, and then you're going, well, how are you going to heal if you don't talk about it? Listen here. You know, this has been percolating in the back of my mind. You talk about things percolating over years. Billy Morgan is a chief. They still refer to him as chief. I disagree. He's not a chief. He went to work for how long? A couple of years, maybe more. For Daniel Smith. The day he got elected, she got elected and appointed premier. He went to work for her. Been fucking sucking her tip for all that time. And then he got elected MP. He had to have known about the liaison with Satina. Billy Moore had to have known about the treatment center with Enoch. He had to have known. They were gonna battle with Nechi Institute and battle guests to push her out of that in the snowbank in the middle of a pandemic. I can't even be civil. I can't even walk up to him and say, hi, good morning, Billy. I can't. I just walk right past him like I don't even know the asshole. I can't. Well, even when. Roy said my aunt. I said he's like a stag and she's like a doe. You know, the stag will send the does out into the field before they go because they want to see if the coast is clear. She stands up in Edmonton and says, I have a letter from Chief Roy Whitney. Why? Because he's denying that he has any connection with Daniel Smith. You know, like what the hell? And she's reading it. Like she's getting this notoriety because she's a stand-in for Chief Roy Whitney. What the hell's the matter with him? He's got no fucking backbone. My late dad used to say, you know, when people had no backbone, I couldn't understand. Now that I'm an elder and I look back and I'm going, it means he's ashamed to be Indigenous. When you don't have a backbone, you're ashamed to be Indigenous. And that's just my opinion. You know, the fact that all this was trying to cover up all what was percolating to make sure that the money flowed if he didn't get into council. At least that contract was signed by to Malika Holmes through that Sam Mureshki. Like that. That's scandalous. And the fact that it's crook, it's criminal. Just and the fact that like somebody was saying, well, were you there? Did you sign it? Well, all those counselors who were there, there were checks being they said invoices, double invoices, and when some of the band counselors questioned it and said, I'm not signing the. It's blacklisting other band counselors. When you're elected, the head chief is blacklisting band counselors. And they're trying to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. Now, the fact that he did all this even with the case of him, the sexual assault case on two men 20, 30 years ago that has percolated to the top, and his propensity for boys. And that's why for me, when I stopped being friends with this forensic psychologist, because he said I was his therapist. Not to me. Okay, I'm just an Indigenous woman. No, this fellow who I'd been associated with for over 30 years only disclosed this to two female tribal police. And those police women are no longer working for the police. I just got assigned a special constable, female constable, to look after me 24/7. And I asked, are all the Tsuut'ina elders getting special constables to, if you have an emergency? And they said yes. So I called another elder. I said, are you getting a special constable? And she says, no. But it's good that you've got one. But I said, this is really for me. I don't feel comfortable with it, only because I know that this whole investigation was. Nathan chasing horse. Yeah, it happened 20 years ago, but money was still being given out for the rent, and for the care of his followers by the former chief and council. And I know some of the women who have major health bills in the States who've applied to try and get reimbursed or to have their bills paid because the health insurance wasn't covering them in the United States. They didn't get. It paid, but yet here's my niece who, a follower of Nathan chasing horse, had her medical bill $72,000 worth paid for by the chief and council. Everything that whatever connection he had to supporting Nathan chasing horse. That's why I said, the Fifth Estate could have added more, but because of the controversy that they had with Buffy St. Marie, they didn't report what they were hoping to report. And even then too, when you had the three chiefs, Roy, Sanford, and Lee. They approached them to see if they could comment, and none of them did except Lee. Now why is that? Well, because leadership would go to housing and threaten the manager's job if that a rental agreement wasn't paid. And all the travel expenses for Nathan's followers, they weren't taken out of the pocket of Roy Whitney. They came out of our band funds. So for me, when I asked, could I get reimbursed for going to Las Vegas because they sponsored 11 people to go down a month before me, it was refused. Yet I know those 11 people weren't gonna get any kind of they didn't have to pay back that money. So again, when people say, well, why are you harping on Nathan chasing horse? No, it's the fallout. You know, the money trail, the manipulation of sucking money from the nation and throwing it to Nathan chasing horse. Who has that power but leadership? Yeah. Well, I think all that'll come out. If Lance and them are doing their due diligence. Well, I had spoke with Zach, and he was the one who had got in contact with the Globe and Mail a couple of years ago. And so even that too, like I said, it's been percolating, but to actually have the lawsuit served. Is monumental. And one of the descendants of Tsuut'ina Nation, they're not on the ban list since some of these people are very bitter and very critical. They said, well, why didn't the chief in council tell us? Okay, I'm going, well, why your grandmother is a nation member but not you. I'm pretty sure that the chief in council, from what I've heard talking with Lance. It's all gonna come together. It's just like it has to be done incrementally because it's so huge. And to your credit and to the credit of Lance and Zachary, and all the people, I've been a victim. I've been a victim on the receiving end and the short end of the stick, and so have you. And all the Albertans and you, and I have been effectively, directly impacted by this. And so have other people, but they don't realize it. There's another C I think that's being investigated by the RCMP, and that's those surgery suites. I'm not sure what they were calling them in the media. But there there Daniel Smith was handing out gifts, contracts, millions of dollars to build those suites on reserve. One of them went Enoch. For knee replacements and shit like that. So if you want to go for surgery, this is the privatization of health care. So if you have the money, you can go pay for it. Well, that's why these treatment centers. They say they're gonna service 2,000 people. I'm going, well, they're not gonna service Tsuut'ina youth, so why did they put it out here? And why did they cut back services, money from the province that was already coming into healthy living for youth programs? Yeah. See it and hear, there's a chief in council. We're helping our youth. Yeah, you signed that damn paper. That guy he only did 10% of the job, but he got 50% of the contract money before the chief, and the new council came in. They that lawyer and the powers that be wrote that check. It's just like Sturgeon Lake trying to get that 15 million back. It's ridiculous what these separatists, these Puritans will call them, or back a lack of a better word, because it's just like the whole new world you're coming into. You're escaping persecution in England, or the Europe, and you're coming into the new world. Well, come on, people, you all came into Alberta, sort of like some sort of Persecution? I don't think so. So why aren't you making the best of it? Instead you want to what? Again, take more money out of the mouths of vulnerable women and children. That's why I say ever since they discovered oil and they'd started those industrial schools, the one in Calgary, and in and then in Parliament within 20 years, within 10 years in Parliament, it's written. If we educate these boys, they're gonna go back to the reserves, and they're gonna marry GR girls, and they're gonna convert them back to savages. That it's a waste of our money and time. So we have to educate the girls too. So what do? They established Indian residential schools, all because they found oil. Shit. And then now. Here's Trump feeding money into Daniel Smith. You have Putin and Russia feeding money into Alberta again for separatist movement. You have two opposing factions who are oil hungry. Because what? Alberta's the third largest oil producer in the world. And what and who's stopping it? First Nations. First Nations people. Yeah. No, years ago when my uncle passed away, I was in grief and I was, just in grief, and I remember seeing and thinking of Superman and how, he had this big key, and he'd fly this key into his fortress and churn it. Well, when I somehow, I just thought Alberta, as the shape of a keyhole, and that's the creator was gonna put a keyhole put the key in Alberta and churn it. And look at what's happening. This is my uncle's been gone for decades. But it's just the notion that the I don't know from EITR and in the podcasts that I do I talk about the great mystery, because a lot of these things have been predicted and have been manifested in so many Indigenous people. You can't just shut it off. And I mean even. There's records in Brandon Residential School of them experimenting on the children for psychic abilities. And then when I talk to people about collective and holistic approaches, especially when you're in a group where you trust everybody, that happens. I said it's a natural human process, but because of religiosity, everybody's looking at it as they'll call it witchcraft, or they'll call it something because they're so ignorant. They don't understand it because they just think what Earth was only created 2,000 years ago. Talk about the naivety or the reality of a poor education, or just the greed, using that as an excuse. Like you said, human beings can do whatever the hell they want as long as they're given permission. And when you have a religious doctrine giving that permission, they've taken it. They've taken it too damn far. What do they call that? Divine destiny, or yeah. Yeah, it's amazing all the interconnections that have to do with all the Indigenous organizations that have been well established by so many Indigenous people who passed away, who were survivors of residential school, who knew what it was like to live with trauma. That's their legacy that this Danielle Smith is bastardizing. And this wrath, and even like putting this recovery center here. But people have to realize, and this is something you need to focus on. What made unique Nechi Institute unique is it was developed by our ancestors, our healers, and our medicine people 50 plus years ago. And the reason being is they knew the residential school was gonna close. And they said we need to heal our people. Because at that time alcohol was the drug. This is in the early 70s, and they said they're gonna close the residential schools, but we need to deal with the intergenerational trauma. Well, that's why I stayed in my podcast. When I was a child, everybody visited everybody. There were you didn't hear about violence or anything lateral, and then all of a sudden alcohol came, and everything all of a sudden the whole community became silent. That's right. Yeah, I have seen that shift in my lifetime. Yeah. And then I just it like I don't know. There's no magic wand to change everything. People like I grew up seeing people pretending to be white, if they had white ancestry or white blood. And I keep on saying my great-grandmother had blue eyes, but she was a Dakota matriarch, spoke the language, taught her children the language, ran away from the cavalry. If they caught her, they would have executed her too, just like they did all the other relatives. I said there was no distinction. I said, but here and now because of being ashamed. CA all like my grandfather said, they didn't start putting up fences until 1952. They didn't start putting up what? Boundary fences around Satina until 74 years ago. See at some point author, and this is what we need, the bridge we need to cross, I need to cross, is where does Nechi Institute fit in this big picture? I have to do my version of Nechi Institute victimhood, and how these assholes, these fascist pancake lovers, have taken our culture and cherry pick what they want, and get their token elders and their token chiefs like Billy Moore and and Roy Whitney. And Roy Whitney, yeah. See, and that's the whole thing too, is like I had Nechi Institute training. I had all this training. Even my mom and my dad, like in terms of traditional ways of thinking. 'Cause people say, well, how did you know what Nathan Chasing Horse was all about? Because of that, absolutely. Do you think Nathan Chasing Horse would have thrived in a community where the majority of people had Nechi Institute training? Hum. It'd be blown out of the water. That's what makes it so tragic. That all the things that we built up, like my mother and my father, my grandparents, that this woman, this savior will call her the Madonna that she wishes she was a born-again virgin. What the hell? Like really, how dangerous is she? Who is that? Daniel Smith, old dog, pancake princess, fuck you and your. Almost died laughing. I thought this was a fucking joke. I went outside to have a smoke, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't stop laughing. I was just out of control. Then I realized it was at the K-Day's pancake breakfast. And I just finished saying about a week or two ago, because we couldn't go to Calgary. We know we were broke as a joke, and we just finished moving my household, my daughter's household, my granddaughter's household. And then we're flat broke. We couldn't even go to a pre-free breakfast or visit any of our friends. Anyway, long story short, I said, Daniel Smith better not show up to any of these K-Day pancake thingies. Exactly those words. I guess she is. Because Edmonton is different from Calgary. Like we don't put on a show. Everybody wear a cowboy hat, put little shit on your boots. No. Our people here are blue collar, salt of the earth. We don't try to be corporate American cowboys. Or fall in love with the Wild West show. And then the only thing I watched on television, I used to watch the Chucks. Well, I don't watch that anymore because for me it's so painful because my brother used to run trucks, and so we all got involved. It's a whole family thing. And so I'm so grieving over my brother who died recently. And then I'm thinking, I don't wanna watch that. That just brings back too many memories, and I wanna sit here and cry. Well, then I got watching the ponies. Yes. The wild ponies, and then I got excited, and I think this is wonderful. And all they got those boys was $25,000 check. And those fucking bull riders and everybody else bareback, they all got $100,000. Yes. With a big bronze. How come our boys didn't get a big bronze? Because Enbridge, the sponsor of the Calgary Stampede, sponsored the competitive powwow for 2 days. Also they sponsor the Indian Village. So like they sort of think, well, we put in so much money. Yet they don't realize that they there if it wasn't for Indians they wouldn't have no fucking company. Exactly. 'Cause they're sucking our resources. They're sucking the tit of Mother Earth. Exactly. And they're treating us like show dogs. Yeah, my white friend, she says, yeah, I when we ask for oil money. And they say, we just throw money to the Indigenous people. If they're squawking and fighting amongst each other, we just throw them money. She says, author, I've heard that in those meetings. I said, well, of course. I said, they don't give a shit. As long as they get money to pay their mortgage, their taxes, and whoever's working for them. They don't care who they put under the bus. They don't. And they don't care if somebody's starving. They don't care if we don't have any sovereignty over our children. They don't care if our children are being trafficked at the age of 14. They don't give a damn that murdered There's so many murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. Shit. And yet what the hell? Talk about fucking white privilege and matriarchy. I said, you have to live and be born in it and every day face the like the S and the injustice of it. I said, because if you haven't breathed it in and experienced it and be angry, like I am so like people are so angry, like of all this money just for this is just one that TR that center. That money that was taken and spent without the process, without it even being challenged. And I think too there was also something to do with the ring road, and just so many things that Roy had his fingers in. And I've grown up here. People can say whatever the hell they want to say about me. I know throughout my life and since I was in my 20s, any time there was some big controversy and somebody wrote a nasty letter to chief and council, author, they said it's you. Every excuse to defame my character, to suppress my voice, the only option I had was to start writing a blog. Because I put it out just like in science fiction. I put it out in cyberspace, hoping that Superman, or the Fantastic for somebody would see it. Yeah. Talk about delusional. But anyway, it worked. It damn well worked. Exactly. Bless people who have a voice. It just makes me upset. And I know when I talk to people about this lawsuit, I know they're upset as well. But at what point is there consultation? I know as everything starts unraveling, I know the chief and counselor are gonna have to approach the elders and again, I have said to other elders. I would say prosecute them, charge them. Yes, they're gonna come back and live in Satina, but restorative and transformative justice needs to be done, and they have to be held accountable for that for the community to understand these are our sovereign rights to protect our most vulnerable. That's why I said, what the hell did they do paying the rent for these 14, 15-year-olds? It. If they were rich or had moved away from the cult, and they came back, and they sued the chief and council for not protecting them. That's the mantle that they take on when you swear on that you're gonna, be an elected official. You know, in a traditional sense, but it isn't traditional because they fail to protect the women and children. Well, it's a breach of oath. It's treasonous. 'Cause in every oath that I've seen, unless yours is different, which I doubt, there are protocols. Whether or not they recognize it or they're put in place, it doesn't matter. They have a sacred responsibility. And that's to look after all our beautiful girls and boys. You know, like my mother used to say, I used to think she was so like gross. You can't trust they'll stick their dink in everywhere, it doesn't belong. Don't worry about that one over there. You can't trust that one because you can't trust them with a package of donuts, my mother used to tell me. And gross mother. Like I'm 10, 12 years old and I'm being schooled on human sexuality and deviance. But prior to that I knew all that stuff from my great-grandma in Cree. I used to think, why is that you know? I ask questions like why is so, and so always drunk. That couple over there, I see them walking down the road. This is in the 50s before our people were even allowed to drink. Then they'd be passed out, and you know, fighting in public and people would be scared they're gonna show up at a funeral or at a wedding. It'd be just the only two. Always disruptive. And then later on I realized that generation of men, and how they were sexually molested in boarding school as little boys. Yeah. As I started to work, you know, I was already in my teens when I realized that. My grandpa John taught me all that. Those ugly, you know, colonizers had their way with the women, the men. Well, even to when our men and women go into prison. You know I have my friend whose sons come out of jail, and they just start drinking and I said, you don't know what they've lived with in that prison. That's right. There's no way to protect yourself. Yes. That's why when I talk about like restorative and transformative justice, I'm talking about the whole concept of human sexuality. It's you know, you can't like people don't want to talk about it. No, you have to. Because the underbelly of all of the analysis of all the work, and that we're doing and bringing forth all of these injustices. Yes, it looks financial. Yes, it looks like embezzlement. And you know, doctoring documents and making lawyers rich, you know. And then finding out your chief is on front page news for you know his violation towards men. Yes. Grown-ass men. That's and then you know well that's why when I went to Las Vegas, and I was talking to The followers. They said we didn't know we were drinking the Kool-Aid, and they started talking about like his even his sexual preference to two-spirited teenagers. And then I thought about our chief, and his propensity for boys. And I thought, like how deviant. Like what was going on between, like whatever was happening between, like rituals and ceremonies that he became so dedicated to supporting this man and his followers. Because that forensic psychologist who'd been his therapist had said to the two tribal female policemen, he says he has a propensity for boys. Now what the hell? And then he even said he'd even say, I don't like this chief because of him. Nathan Tracy Horse has thrived in Satina. Again, what the hell was happening in those therapy sessions? That these things he's bringing up to these two female constables. Now get this, our chief of police and his partner, who's also a policewoman, have a house up here in Prydas, like and again, right next to Chief Roy Whitney. So, it makes me wonder why I got a special constable female to call. And again, where did those two women go? Cause this person, this forensic psychologist, I heard them. They were in my living room right here. And he says they started talking about certain people they all knew in terms of like human trafficking and things like that, and so, that he felt at ease talking with them in front of me. But yet for me it was all a show because if he had any gumption, he would have dealt with it rather than trying to get notoriety for knowing like the nitty-gritty of Chief Whitney. 'Cause he never met Nathan Chasing Horse at all. So that only led me to believe like, what is it that he wants to become famous for? Which really sickened me. Still sickens me. Well, what business is that psychologists have in disclosing confidential patient information to the cops? So he could see again too. He knew that the Fifth Estate was going to interview me. So he wanted to make it public like that because the police were also being interviewed by the Fifth Estate. Like I'm pretty sure if the Fifth Estate hadn't decided to do a story, he would have kept quiet. Wouldn't have told wouldn't have said anything in front of me. Yeah. I was in therapy too, and even when my therapist found out that the Fifth Estate was gonna interview me, she set up for counseling sessions in 1 month for. That's 1 a week. Did I ask her for that? And I just thought this is too much. Again, this woman made her money off of listening to the survivors over 300. witnesses of Indian residential school, that she sat in to listen to their statements. That's why I am really weary of mental health workers. That's why for me, like Nechi Institute, and just Indigenous people helping Indigenous people is vital to healing. And they're taking that away. They took it away. And and because of what? This woman pretending to be an ally, this woman, kissing the very ground of Indigenous men who other women from their communities wouldn't even touch them. Yeah. Really. As Indigenous women we have taste. No, it's disgusting. They are disgusting because very disgusting. Yeah. So next week's our powwow. Of course if it's gonna be this smoky like this, I'm not gonna be able to go. It's too much. I'm not going anywhere. Staying in it nowhere. Like this is nothing. You should hear in Toronto, Ontario. My friend. It hasn't even warmed up. It's only July. In Ontario, there's 200 fires burning right now. Like the whole town of Hamilton, Ontario is just covered in soot. Smoke. Like horrible. Well, they say they have 3 data centers in northern Ontario. They want to have a data center in northern Alberta, and I'm going. Look at what the tar sands have done to all the northern trees. The whole northern section is all brittle because of the tar sands. And now they want to put data centers, drain more groundwater, make all the trees brittle again. Like wake up. And then you have the audacity of these American senators saying, they're gonna build a pipeline now. To take the contracts. At the expense of women and children. The most vulnerable. And they think, well, we'll get these contracts. Show me the money. Shit. I'm 74 years old. Ever since I was 15. It's like, show me the money. Where is it? Show me the money. It comes at a damn price. It comes at a damn price. And I sure as hell I'm not going to pay that price. Like I said, when I was director of education I was, tempted with an offer so that instead of being fired, I'd be transferred. Like better pay, less stress. But it would have come at a point where I would have had to have said yes to Roy Whitney. Like he came right to my office and offered that to me. And I said no. And all the other people who were on boards and siphoning money, I said no. Like I like until board members who are Indigenous have actually, lived in another country, have paid their mortgage or rent or whatever, just, by working, then they can say, how hard it is to work as a board member. Even like I sat in as a non-profit board chairperson. And the work I did and the rest of the board just, Unless you have somebody who's actually working, then the B board's not gonna survive. And that's just the reality of boards, but that's the reality of First Nations. Unless you have people who are actually going to work, do their due diligence, and take the criticism, the threats of being sued or somehow trying to keep you quiet. You have to have the courage to say something. Like my father, like my late father, you have to have a backbone. That backbone means a hell of a lot. Like you said, all the ancestors that created Nechi Institute, all that insight and wisdom they had. And yet nobody is looking at it. And yet they fucking well say, I'm a traditional thinker. Bullshit. Bullshit to you. You don't know what you're doing to hurting our own people. Yeah. That's why I said even the Native Women's Shelter. Like that was supposed to be for Indigenous women like from the tribes of the Treaty 7 area. But they do that in Edmonton too. The white people and all these pretendians, they take over all the not-for-profits. Yeah. Well. See, for me, like they invite me and I talk, they pay me an honorarium, and I've said to them, you need to really do more recruiting of Indigenous elders, 'cause I think there's 40,000 in the city. I said there's gotta be more Indigenous elders out there that you can have on these committees, or organize those elders. But no, they have a select few. It's always that Reggie and Rosemary, yeah. How did they make their way in there? I think it's just the practices of what they do on a daily basis. Like how'd I put it? Who do you know that the city of Edmonton uses? What's his name? Whiskey Jack. The university uses him, the city Alberta. Francis Whiskey Jack. His wife Mariel. Yeah, so they usually have a couple. So that way it's like look, they're a happy couple. So it's not there's certain again, what standards are they trying to emulate? And again, I remember when Ralph Steiner, when he became Lieutenant Governor of Alberta. His granddaughter was my second cousin. We went they were at the hotel. They were going to a banquet. So we went upstairs to his room, and he was getting ready, and he was talking to everybody in the room, and he said to my cousin, his granddaughter, he says, I wonder why white government, appointed me this. Like what makes me so special to, receive this honor. And he was talking to her, trying to, say, we've got to look at these things. Why do they do these things? What is their purpose behind it? And that's why, like, when I look at people who get these honorary degrees, I'm going, what purpose does it hold? What is it serving? See, and just until Daniel Smith came in, did they serve a lot of honorary degrees? No, they didn't. And again, too, by having these honorary degrees, it's taking away the money from the nonprofits or from the grassroots people who actually do the grunt work, the actual work, like yourself and my late mother, and and thousands of other Indigenous people to work on the front lines. They're saying, well, we've chosen a select few. I'm going at the expense of taking away the funding for those projects that the grassroots people wanted in the first place and established. We're not perfect. I'm not far from it. But the reality of it is like, it's just like why people have depending on people to support, and to help people guide people. And it's not just an individual, it's a group of people that are being guided, and then you take that away. That's why, when I think about this recovery center, and like I said, all the things that we try to face, like all those people who sobered up trying to face, like the abuse they created, the time they've served in prison for the abuse they've created, and then for them to live in our communities. Like all these things. It's not easy. Put Danielle Smith in there. She wouldn't like I always say that about white feminists. They sure like to talk. I said, well, come on. Live a year in my community. In any Indigenous community. It's one thing to talk, but it's another thing to actually do it. That's true. That is very true. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know how things are gonna work out, but I know it makes me angry. And I have acquaintances who say, well, Maureen, I wouldn't spend the time a day to even go and see Nathan chasing horse being sentenced. And all the money I put out to do that is nothing. Nothing compared to like all his victims. That poor man who lost his son, because Nathan said he was gonna cure him of cancer. And I say to like even my niece, she sh the followers say, yeah, we know she was hogtied and gang raped by his followers. But the word with the F her friends, and these are her friends in Nevada, even though she's living here in Satina now. Says she won't press charges. And I said, yes, that's the point. I said, even like she had disclosed this. And yet one of the ladies that has a podcast that I called up and I said, could you interview me? Nathan Chasing Horse has been arrested. She didn't know me. She did a lot of advocacy for the Native Women's Shelter. She said, okay. And she puts it on Facebook, and so my niece saw it. And she sent her an email and said, why are you going to interview my auntie? And she told her not to interview me. And this was like BEF during the whole time that the tribal police were interviewing her too, and her disclosing, yeah, she had been sexually assaulted by Nathan's followers. And even my contact with the tribal police said, she's not following him anymore. And I said, well then why is she contacting the lady who I'm doing the podcast on? Why is she demanding that she not published the podcast? I said, this isn't just one time. I said, twice within 3 or 4 months. I said, my niece has confronted this woman and saying, don't interview my aunt. I said, she's still following him, even though she claims she's been sexually assaulted. Like there's some sort of what I don't know, in psychology they call it, like you say, psychosis. There's also this disassociation or multiple personalities or something where people have gone through so much that they still don't want to believe the unbelievable. Like the one man, he divorced his wife, he's working, he's not educated, he's working, he bought a house, a mortgage. So that Nathan Chasing Horse parents could live in there. Like these are still followers of him. And so how many just sleeper cells? How many of these young people are so out of touch with their traditional roots, their home communities, that they have to gravitate to some fallacy, some illusion, some mythology that they create a cult of it? When they cannot damn well go back to their home communities, their home reservations, Inuit Métis, or First Nations communities and live there. That's why I say, it's just like a feminist or any pretendian. If they're even that's why I say some have status cards and never lived in community. And yet, if they did, I'm pretty like I always say. Why didn't people look and see why wasn't he why didn't he have a bunch of followers from the reservation he came from? Come on, people smart enough. Look at where he was born and raised. Why did he run away? Why did he run away to make his whatever money he could make? So as much as people want to think that it's not significant, it is. It is significant because it's a reflection on how desperate we are to hold on to our culture and our identity. But it's how and when and how to use it in an appropriate way. That's why I like when I'm talking with you about Nechi Institute, and just the groundwork of it. The whole fact is where in the hell of all North America has there been such a program? We really need to, have a voice about it because damn it, we're not stupid. We're not ignorant. We didn't lose our culture. It's embedded in the Nechi Institute for Time and Prosperity. It's not like, yeah, there's all these people who talked about their experience and they want to what? Destroy those records in 27. Like I'm saying, you know, this whole D. What you call Indian residential school industrial school denialism. No, again, they're trying to erase our oral history. Like 10, 20,000 years they're still trying to erase it. Like how stupid court decision, and it was a directive from the Supreme Court when it went to court. And again, it's all the men that were in charge of that whole fucking thing. The bureaucratic mess that they've created. Like who gave Phil Fontaine the authority to go ahead and settle for $10,000 fucking dollars? Nobody. He never sought the he didn't seek. Free prior and informed consent. He fucking breached it. He sold us out. That's why all these shit is happening to him now. Yeah, okay, then he's not been found guilty. But it still hangs over his ugly head. Him and his wife could afford to buy land in a big giant house west of Calgary towards Banks. They sit comfortably with all the millions of dollars that they made. Him and his Kathleen lawyer. No different from Wrath. And I think they should be investigated too. And how they went into cahoots. Fucking bitch Kathleen lawyer, I can't stand her. Sleeping with the enemy. Well, she was my mum's lawyer. She really, put her clinches or claws into Calgary. I think this is before she even hooked up with Valta Fontaine. Or she was probably in the back room, while again percolating to the top as the fry bread burns. Yeah. Yep. That's right. Shit. Morality. Did you hear about that center to the one that died? He's 71 years old. What the hell is it? He was 71, he died last week. Yeah, okay. The one in the US. Yeah, and so all these sexual encounters that he paid off to men. Like a sexual what? Sorry. You know why, like you said, some of these legal have been paid off, like they've been given money. What did you settling out of court? Yes. So he did that. But now that he's dead, it's okay for them to talk and show and say. Like it's a mall, like I'm just going, geez. That's why I say, all these politicians who've settled out of court, like even my neighbor here, Emmett, I hear he's moved to Arizona because he settled out of court with the victim. Yes. As the fry bread burns. It really burns. Yes. And there's also implication too with money again being siphoned into his company. Understand this, you got a trucking company. If you're in cahoots with the head chief, he gives you contracts. Shit. Damn it anyway. And that's Regina's nephew. No, that's she's not or not through marriage, no. Distant though. Distant. Yeah. They were on council together. Yes, yes, of course. Yes, on council. Brother and sister or nephew and auntie, adoption type of thing. But it's amazing that when people die, that all the shit, you know, it can be revealed because who you know, there's no law about it now. And then my white friend and her F friend W, I had a stampede breakfast with them. They were talking about these Republican conferences they have in the United States. And of course I'm so naive. Like I didn't even know that you could freely access porn until the pandemic, because I was talking to my white friends about sexually transmitted diseases in old folks' homes. And so I found out, my goodness, you mean it's legal. You can actually surf the web and find porn. Did not know that. But see, again, this is I'm being educated by one. White women. So I'm at the Stampede breakfast and she said, yeah, when they have these Republican conferences, the app Grindr shuts down. And I said, what do you mean Grindr? Do you know the software Grindr? Do you know what it is? Like I didn't know. This is what, 19 hours ago. I have to read this to you. I know you're busy. Regina Crowchild, this is Lance Many Wounds. Okay, 19 hours ago. Regina Crowchild and Jeannie Grow Crowchild, let's continue the conversation here. Jeannie, as you seem to ask to know so much about the litigation, please free to position accordingly. Defamation and slander are real offenses, so please enlighten me on offenses that I am apparently guilty of. What Indian country needs is transparency and accountability. And I will share anything you accuse me of. You must be better if we want better. We must be better if we want better. And Jeannie Crowchild, did you file your conflict of interest paperwork for this term? And so Lance Many Wounds again. Weird. Regina Crowchild. Jean and Crowchild, let's have this discussion in the open so people can see. I'm still a volunteer, and I work for $1 a month. I only think about my grandkids in 7 generations. Regina, we both agreed on transparency, so let's share what's been going on. At our last band meeting, you called out myself and the casino board on renovation, saying that they and I were causing catastrophic harm to the casino, when truth was that the board tasked me to get the renovation on the rails. Somehow we bid out the casino, with 4 pieces of papers $100 million, and thought it would just work out. Regina, you've been in council for a very long time on Satina. Your transparency. Where did you spend my kids' money and my grandkids' money? Please explain how you allocated resources to the casino and the nation in general. Did you support not removing Roy as when he was charged? Can you explain why? Agreed guilty until proven innocent, but please explain your rationale. P.S. to all family associated with Regina and Jeannie. I support you. I apologize. This is playing out publicly, but part of cleaning things up is calling out the nonsense that's happened. Satina is a mess. But we are cleaning it up so we can support our members. The Chief Starlight and his office will work with anyone to move the nation forward. So, then 8 minutes ago, Lance Many Wounds posted. Regina Crowchild and Jeannie Crowchild, where are you both at? Let's have this conversation in the open, not in the shadows. I've worked my ass off to accumulate the skill sets I have, and it hasn't been easy, and I'm building after a catastrophic investment I made into someone in 2021, and it cost me literally 20 million plus. And thank God I have patient investors because they got caught in it as well. I'm responsible for a lot of other people's money, and I don't take that lightly. It's the hardest thing which both you will and understand is you're not in the fight. Regina, you're supposed to be a fiduciary, but you flat out failed. You just spend the nation's money to go talk about treaty. Tell what you did to A. Tell what you did. What did you accomplish? Let me tell you something about treaty. You need a war chest of money to fight, an entire law firm of lawyers to fight, because you're literally fighting one of the oldest monarchies in the world and going up against a country with hundreds of billions in resources. If I hear about you slandering me again, you'll be talking to my lawyers next. One of the chiefs who slandered me too is willing to sign an affidavit for your information. This is your one and only warning. That was 5:11 minutes ago. As the fry bread burns. Yep. The Crow Child posted 5 hours ago. I for one would like to know what the hell is going on. This treatment center, this health center, and the counselors taking leave with pay. How the hell does that happen? I mean, they get money waved at them all of a sudden. It's where do I sign? And the thought of the nation's well-being and generations' future fucking goes out the window. Yeah, council should carry some shame. If you're being called out, then there must be a damn good reason. And we need to know. Those of you who barely get by making ends meet. And some of us some of us homeless. We deserve to know. Is what is happening to for our nation. I for one I'm sure we feel like, well, there's the decision makers, it's on them if they fuck up. And it's not, look, they actually did and we're broke again. But don't you get mad, that's a paid position. Xakuga, that's a chief, I guess. Yeah, it's the name for the chief. Yeah. A paid get the non-status call it public position. Keyword public. Setina counselor means we get to know what's going on. So don't start fighting back. Just admit there's something wrongdoing and see how we can fix it. When the swearing in of a chief and council is going on, it should be amended to include I swear I will not sign away our rights, and I will swear to never take bribes. I swear to give all monies made to the people of Setina. I just threw that last one in there because I want to go to the casino. Thank Lance many wounds. You know there's a lot of warriors, good warriors out there, and Lance is one making sure there's accountability. So, Lance many wounds comes back 3 hours ago. He says, Wanda Crowchild, thank you. It's been hard because the nonsense and lies that get spewed out are egregious. Weird or just trying to make things better, but we're handed a complete disaster from the last leadership, who Regina Crowchild was a part of. We all were You all were a few steps from getting third-partied. What happened is the unacceptable, and it needs to be told. They lied to all of us. Yeah, it's so bad. Lance many wounds, says Wanda Crowchild. Regina Crowchild, you need to chime in. Please enlighten us on what actually came from the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of nation dollars spent for your travel all over the years going around talking about treaty. Jeannie Crowchild, what did you accomplish at AFN? Jean now better just fucking get herself a lawyer. It sounds like it, and the same with Jeannie. Yeah. And the more Jeannie mops off, the worse it's gonna get. Well, again, she's like Roy Whitney. She really believes she's innocent, that her hands are clean. Well, Jeannie works for her mum. It's quite obvious she answers to her every beck and call. She thinks that she's a rock star. She's living in an illusion, or an illusion. Again, when people aren't in the real world, aren't balanced, this is my own philosophy and my own opinion, is that sometimes, like I always picture that Christian, Adam and Eve and the tree, and the serpent and the tree, and those trees like her apples. It's like if you're not balanced, it's like all of a sudden somebody's gonna shake that tree, and all the apples are gonna fall down. When she's saying, we're contributing, well, no you're not, because if you were contributing, the apples would still be on the tree, and everybody would get to eat those apples. Trauma's the fact is they've been in there too freaking long. Same thing happened with us in Samson. I ain't judging. It's the way it is. They normalize this, corruption. Well, like even with human trafficking. People get their daughters, 14, 15-year-olds who get pregnant, and they marry them off right away, or they're so poor that they can't look after their daughter, so they marry them off. Even you get transferred out, you're another community's responsibility, not ours. And yet the men keep on marrying women who come into the communities. Like that Indian act. Like really hurt women, and made us made us attack one another. I just like my friend said author, she says, I wish you know like in my life I'd like to see young women not be so vicious to other young women. This patriarchy, and INIS, you know, like that's the reality of it. And I said, well, for me as an elder and knowing the women that I've grown up with, and seeing younger women, like I'm seeing a transition. But I think there's needs to be more education done. And it's too bad because like Nechi Institute could have been instrumental in doing some sort of curriculum on, you know, young adolescent girls. We did that work. Okay. I did work in child welfare developing curriculum on kids aging out population on a youth training schools, but they just shut us out. And that's it's like reinventing the damn wheel again because they give money to the University of Calgary for their Indigenous program, and what do? They PhD these people out. You know, again without actually having any resources, like say re-referencing Nechi Institute. It's and again, who's getting the laureates? These, you know, white academics or these people who have, you know, can say, I've got Indigenous blood even if they don't have a status card. They still say I have Indigenous blood and I'm going, have you lived in Inuit First Nations or Métis communities? If you haven't, then don't have a pot to piss in. So get out of the stew. Get out of this. You know what we're cooking up, 'cause you don't know where it begins and where it ends. They're just trying to get like you can't take it with you, like Buffy St. Marie. Shit. She can't take all the credit of whatever the hell she thinks she created, or in her delusional mind. No, that's the epitome. And Alvin Manitopia is sick enough for her. Well, like I said, there's so many people too still picking up for Nathan chasing horse. And even back in the day Elvin contacted me. I saw Nathan at the Elbow River Casino. What should I do? Call the police. No, I'm not gonna turn in a brother. What the fuck? Why call me in the first place then? He actually said that. Yeah. Just a fucking gossip queen, that's all he is. Like you know, I've gone through all that with people. You know, and it's heartbreaking that, you know. I had one to go down to the jury, and then I managed to go down to the sentencing. But even, you know, people thinking, well, author, why you know, what you're doing is admirable, but when it came to it, only one person came out and helped me. And you know, and I'm grateful. I'm truly grateful for that. And because of that it's empowered me to do more podcasts, and you know, really talk about how important it is for Indigenous women to talk about their lives. 'Cause it means something. One of the chiefs actually came up to me, and when I was sitting in the big room with the chiefs, I'm sitting at the front row because, you know, I'm hard of hearing most of the time, and I get easily distracted by, you know, my attention deficit disorder kicks in when I get trying to be analytical over there and looking at this one over there. What the hell is he doing here? And then I'm going back again to what's going on in the podium. You know what I'm saying? So I get distracted. Anyway, the chief comes up to me and he said, you know, guest, I heard you speak tea last night, and it really moved me what you said. Because I talked about poverty and about us women and children, our children being defenseless, trying to go to school, and we're being bombarded with all this racist racism. And I said, the big problem is 50% of our population is not engaged. That's the women. We don't have a voice. Like I can't go to this meeting tomorrow and stand up and speak. It's only for chiefs. And the majority of the chiefs are men. They've never experienced our way of looking at life. Yeah, they call us life givers, they call us, but at the end of the day our opinion doesn't matter. It's very, the matriarchy is ignored. I'm not saying that I need to be back in the limelight, or I need to know. Our women need training. They need to know, they need to go back to the basics, be homemakers again. Be the artists, to be the doctors, to be the lawyers, to, take control of their children and their households. Like Bake Bannock. Don't go standing in line at the Tim Hortons every fucking day. Cook a big home-cooked meal for your kids. Something, like back to the basics. And anyway, he said I really appreciate what you had to say, he said, because I hear you and he said, I just wish that I could do more to help you. And then he started talking like that, and then we got distracted. One of the chiefs went up and spoke, and I knew he was gonna break down and start crying when we talked because he was making an intervention on a residential school denialism, and he was sexually abused as a child, and he in fact has been charged as an adult many years ago, and has done work in this area all his life. So excuse me, I said I have to go support my friend. So I got up, and you won't believe this, about 10 people got up the same time as I did, and we once stood behind the chief that spoke. So I never was able to go back and pick it up. But I could tell that it was really troubling for him. Like he's trying to find solutions. He's trying to find methods by which he knows things are not going well. He can see that his community is suffering and this and that. But they don't know how to engage us. They don't. So as a result they just keep going to meetings. So it makes me realize that we need to get organized. But we can't do it relying on other organizations and Indian affair, and we could probably get money later on, but Daniel Smith is no longer organize us. Well, like this weekend the Sioux Valley Dakota Nation Watchie, the powwow, 80 years. So I was like 6 years old, I was 6 years old, and they'd already been, celebrating every year for 6 years by the time I was born. And I think in my grandmother, Daisy DeWan Crouch Crane Crowchild. She did a lot of volunteer work, with the Anglican Church doing the rummage sales, selling, getting second-hand clothes and selling them, refurbishing them, making money. And because she was Dakota Sioux and my mom was Dakota Sioux as well, she took that auxiliary money and she rented a tent, like a big top, but it was only 10 feet by 6 feet. It was a long rectangular. And she had people put it up by our old community hall. That was our first Indian days. That's how it started with my grandmother's bake sale, rummage sale monies. Was that in Satina? Yeah, at Satina. That was the woman's auxiliary that did that. What year was that? Do you remember? I was 12, so let's see. 12. I'm 74 now. 62 years ago. Yeah, okay. So 62 years ago. That's in 1964. So a lot of people wanna, claim that, well, so-and-so was on chief and so was on council. But it was the women who fundraised the money. Like I said, well, that's what I told our chief when I spoke that night before. I said, we're the ones you go to any band office in this country. It's the women that are running the show. We're the backbone of the community. We know what goes on. We live it. We're lawyers, we're accountants, we're band managers, we're HR directors, social workers, educators, teachers. We're the ones I said that run the show. But we're not at the tables. Yep. And I think I really shook him up. Well, see. In 64, like 62, 63, 64, 65, that's when alcohol like I said, the alcohol was coming in, and it was just all of a sudden the community went silent. So that that the women coming together and making money. Like I don't know if it was jealousy, men being jealous of other men's wives, I don't know. Or just the fact that they were beating up their wives and didn't want anybody to know. Who the hell knows? I agree. Like my friend in Long Plains, her have known her since she was 15. Works with us. The band has worked in administration her entire life. My cousin, she's, 65, director of education. Not education, director of health. Just, just women. Yourself, like I said, it's the backbone. And yet because of patriarchy and colonial ways of thinking, it's like women aren't thinking, women can't think. And yet who looks after their adult children, and who looks after their grandchildren, even their adult grandchildren? It's women. That's why I said, you can say matriarchy and all this stuff. I know you're gonna be born and you have to live in it. You're not obeying that man who's not even concerned about who's looking after his children. It comes down to women. Yep. Anyway, it's like that young woman, that Michaela, that did the blast on the fucking pancakes. Fascist pancakes. She's gone viral. It'll be 1 billion views and... she's white, she's young, she's lippy, she's gutsy, she's shows up in her jeans and t-shirt, cutoffs, and she's not gonna get beat up by the cops. They're gonna let her go. Like I know what it's like to be targeted. Yeah, well see, that's the thing too, is like even for me when I came back from Las Vegas, and I just wanted anonymity. I didn't want nobody to know what I was doing, where I was going, nothing. Just so I didn't have to deal with that extra stress. And the even talking to, people about like how I was feeling, all that was personal, and again, everything we do in life that's hard teaches us something. But we've got to take care of our mental health, our spiritual health. And that's what Nechi Institute was all about, my friend. Was taking care of your spirit. The spirit will take care of you if your spirit is healthy. That's what I talk till I'm very blunt when it comes to women, and there I spent 3 hours last night with one woman, and all her kids are on crack. Meth, crystal meth. And she's now taking care of all her grandkids. And they raise shit that her kids raise shit all hours of the night, 20, 30 years old. These are grown-ass kids. Yes. They don't have no fucking education. They didn't go to school. They just get stoned up all damn day. Yeah, like my friend in Portage. Her son is staying in her house that she has in Portage, climbs up on top of the roof, gets police presents at least once a month. Stuff. Like I said, it's even with my sister and her boys, like I don't interfere because, when they're high I can't reach them, can't talk to them. Like when even with women's attitudes towards me, I can't change them. They've been indoctrinated and they're narcissistic or Machian. Like I don't have time for that. Like I said, it's one thing, like I said, living alone and being lonely and taking care of my spirit, all that, I have to be really, have some boundaries down to protect myself. More so too, like even talking about what we're talking about. These things, like some people just don't even give a damn, or even want to talk about it. 'Cause as soon as you talk about it they change the subject, and 'cause you know why. Because it hurts them too and their kids are involved in that shit. Them too have been sexually molested, and their kids never dealt with it. Yeah. And you think of all those children that are out there, and the hundreds of thousands of them that are now in childcare. Yes. And nobody there to defend them. Exactly. I know when I took my niece, 7 years of therapy. 7 years, of just nurturing her. Like it takes, you gotta do the work. But if you're just on battle fatigue, 'cause there's too many. Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about with the women that are suffering now. Right? They're bad, that's a good word. Thank you. Battle fatigue. You too. I could hear that when you were in Vegas, and we had no money and I had to figure out how I was gonna move over here and like I get involved in this and that, I get, invited to meetings and shit, and I have to be really careful, analytical. And you too, you do the same thing. You're always on the go. Like you need a full-time assistant to help you with your wheelchair, you to your motor car with your your plants and your medicines. Yes. But at least I'm getting like I have some help now. Like I'm just grateful I can call this constable. So he's helpful. Yes, her name is Cheryl.
I just want to say in conclusion of this podcast that so many people in Sutuna, the people that I've grown up with, are concerned about this lawsuit. And like I said to the one lady who's they're close family friends, and I said, she was 14 when Nathan Chasinghurst picked her up at the school. She wasn't a part of Nathan Chasinghurst's followers. She wasn't involved in the cult. And until 2015, she documented everything. Nathan videotaping her, everything. And I said, of all people, that young lady should sue the chief and council, because even though they have fiduciary obligations, they also swore an oath to protect the most vulnerable, and they didn't protect this young girl. Out of all the people, she's a nation member. My niece wasn't. But because they swore on when they joined in Chief and Council, they didn't protect her. They didn't support her because she wasn't following Nathan Chasing Horse. Understand this. When people say, why do you still follow and talk about Nathan Chasing Horse? Because of all the things that were percolating, of all the ways he had money was being siphoned for political leaders, so they could keep that hold, that power over people, at the cost of an innocent child. On the Fifth Estate, she went down to the courthouse to release her legal papers so she could talk and say, he ruined my life. Bless her heart. She had the courage to come up and text me. For years we'd be corresponding back and forth. I know. My niece wasn't listening to me, but that young woman, my childhood neighbor's daughter, my hat's off to her. That young woman needs to be compensated because nobody in leadership protected her. That's what I want to say. All this stuff that's percolating, all this sexual assault from Roy Whitney on 2 men, this other band counselor allegedly, paid out of court to have the charges dropped. But I know it'll still appear in court, but that woman will plead as an unfriendly witness. Hearsay. But a lot of this stuff that women have argued, fighting against other women when you're supposed to be there protecting children. No matter, what money comes to you and you're saying treaty rights, the rights of children and women and the most vulnerable. That's why when that young woman says fascist pancakes, she knows. I'm not still talking about Indigenous women and girls. Yes, there's a crisis of murdered and missing Indigenous children. But in general, the rights of any woman in Alberta is being jeopardized. So people, wake up. Please. Anyway, I tried to do my due diligence on this podcast. Have a good day.